Hello and welcome to Psyched, the show where we explore psychedelics through social, economic, and political perspectives.
Introducing our next speaker, we have Madalyn McElwain. Madalyn is a lawyer and activist, drug policy reformer, and harm reductionist. She currently serves as Chief Legal and Financial Officer for DanceSafe, a 501c3 public health organization that promotes health and safety in electronic music and nightlife communities. In her role at DanceSafe, she advocates for the safer consumption of drugs by providing resources and peer education on outreach at music festivals and nightlife events, in addition to various organizational, program-related, and operational duties. Madalyn's involvement in drug policy and harm reduction began in 2012 as director of her law school's chapter of Students for Sensible Drug Policy, where she hosted various educational events related to harm reduction, cannabis law, and the impacts of the war on drugs. Madalyn has extensive knowledge in the legal aspects of both nonprofit operations and drug policy and has 6 years of experience sitting on the board of a startup nonprofit. She believes that drug policy should be rooted in science, compassion, and public health, and is dedicated to helping dismantle the war on drugs. Madalyn, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to Psyched.
Hi, Merrick. Thank you so much for having me and for hosting this wonderful gathering. I'm honored to be here, and I'm honored to speak to you all virtually. I look forward to the day that we all get to actually meet in person in the physical realm again. So I went back and forth a lot on what I was going to talk to you all about today. Originally, I was going to talk to you about how I believe we can get the academics more involved in true and meaningful drug policy reform. Because I am an attorney, I'm a lover of academia, and I've recently had an experience with academics at an event down at ASU's law school. It was basically a conversation about the Controlled Substances Act, which turned 50 this year. And I observed a lot of things that were discussed. It was a very progressive group of folks talking about what to do, how to amend and restructure the CSA to account for true, meaningful, and public health geared drug policy reform. And there's a lot that can be unpacked there, because I really think that the academics were missing the mark. And so I decided I'm not actually going to talk about that today. So if that is something that interests you, please feel free to reach out to me. I will be, or I have intentions of writing an article about it. And so I'm interested in that dialogue if you are too. However, I decided that due to the shift that we're currently experiencing now in the United States and globally, specifically with the rising of civil unrest around, Black lives and that movement, I decided that I'll spend the first half of today just talking about the organization I work for, DanceSafe, and then I'll reserve a little bit of time at the end of my talk to kind of go into and addressing white privilege, anti-racism, and allyship within the psychedelic community, as I feel it's a little bit more appropriate at this time to be discussing something like that. But first, I'll talk about DanceSafe. I'm not sure if you all are interested, and thank you for that really nice, yeah, you're welcome, Chelsea. Thank you for that really nice introduction, Merrick. So DanceSafe is a 501c3 public health organization. We were founded in 1998 in the San Francisco Bay Area. Danielle, you might be familiar with DanceSafe. We started as kind of this, our founder, Emmanuel Sferos, he was this punk anarchist, and he was going to school in Berkeley, and he realized that he had a lot of friends that were partaking in MDMA use or ecstasy. But then he realized that there were a lot of the MDMA that his friends were using in the underground rave scenes in the Bay Area was actually adulterated. And at that time, there were some pretty dangerous adulterants that were being added to the ecstasy pills like PMA and PMMA. And so he realized there was a need for some sort of services around the recreational and underground use of MDMA. And so that is kind of how DanceSafe started. He set up rogue drug checking services in parking lots at warehouse raves and in some nightclubs in the San Francisco Bay Area, and started offering basically peer education services and drug checking services for the folks in underground rave scene at that time. And so, more to 20 years later, 2 decades later, we're still here, but we've really expanded our scope of services. So we do harm reduction related to anything related to the nightlife industries, music festivals, and on the arts scene. And so we are a chapter-based organization. And obviously take everything I'm saying with a grain of salt. Obviously what has transpired in this year with the pandemic and such has really altered what our services look like in this moment. But pre-COVID, we had 25 active chapters across the United States and Canada. We have a free online training program that you're required to go through in order to become a DanceSafe volunteer. And then we provide resources for folks to start chapters in their regions, usually in a large city or a state is how the chapters are named. And the volunteers set up shop at local nightlife events, music festivals and such, in a booth setting. And then the trained peer educators are present for folks to approach them at the DanceSafe booth to talk about taboo and stigmatized topics. And so we're notoriously known for our drug education. We have various educational postcards with really fun artwork with the various drugs that people like to consume in recreational settings. And on the back of those postcards is factual, unbiased information about dosage, duration, risks, etc. Our point is to just provide unbiased, factual, scientific information for folks to make more informed, healthy lifestyle decisions. But aside from the drug education, we do offer the drug checking services where the promoter will allow us to do that expressly. So we use reagent drug checking kits. We also manufacture reagent kits and we sell them to the public online at dancesafe.org, and also fentanyl test strips. So those are available online as well. But in the time of gatherings and music festivals, we would set up shop and provide those services on site to folks who are attending the event, so that way they can have some sort of analysis of the substance that they intend to ingest. And there's a lot of limitations to those reagents, but it's better than nothing. And so that's a huge component of our services, but we have certainly branched off. So we also offer information about heat stroke and dehydration. A lot of the times the deaths associated with MDMA are actually from heat stroke, because you're in heightened temperatures, you're constantly dancing and moving, and you're not consuming enough water or taking time to really cool down. And so our peer educators are informing people about these type of risks too, aside from just what the drug can do to you. What's your set and setting? What are your environmental factors that are impacting your experience? How can they be risky? So we distribute literature about that in conjunction with electrolytes so people can stay hydrated. We have a ton of information on sexual health and consent. We distribute hundreds of thousands of free condoms, both internal and external condoms, each year at events. When we have programs now too, so we have a program called We Love Consent, and its goal is to dismantle the rape culture in the nightlife setting. That in and of itself is a huge undertaking, but my colleague Kristen Karras, she's been an amazing person in spearheading this consent program for us. In response to the COVID-19, with everything going online, we created a new program called Party in Place. as a take off of shelter in place. And so since COVID hit, we've been we've teamed up with Zendo, which is, as many of you probably know, the Zendo Project is a sanctuary service. It's basically peer counseling for those going through any type of psychological difficulties, whether or not it's related to a psychedelic experience or not. So DanceSafe has teamed up with Zendo. We're offering peer support groups to folks in the music festival and nightlife and music industries who have experienced substantial hardship because of the cancellation of events and everything that has happened due to COVID. Let's see, so yeah, so that's, so we've branched out from, we started as like, this rogue drug checking, like anarchist service in the Bay Area, and we've morphed into becoming this more holistic harm reduction organization that addresses more than just drug use, just to branch into more topics and things that impact people who are involved in the nightlife economies and ecosystem. And then, we've all, at our heart and at the core of our existence is social justice. The only reason that DanceSafe exists, and I know Danielle touched on this at the end of her talk, is because of prohibition, drug prohibition. We only exist because there's a gap in education, or like an honest education around drug use and for youth. So we try to fill that gap by peer educating folks, because these topics aren't talked about honestly in any type of school system. And we also exist because folks are always going to engage in consciousness expansion, whether that's through the black market or through pharmaceuticals. And so what prohibition does, as you all obviously know, is that it's just abdicated control to an unregulated market. And so we're seeing this flood of adulterated and misrepresented substances that that continuously become riskier and riskier for folks. We are in the middle of a fentanyl and an overdose crisis. And so in response to that, DanceSafe conducted some research and development in conjunction with the University of California, San Francisco. And those studies aren't published yet, but we were able to identify one urine analysis test strip by the manufacturer BTNX that actually picks up on fentanyl and most of its analogs within a substance. And so it's made to pick up on metabolized fentanyl in urine, but we're now using it and selling it. And we're not the first harm reduction organization to use these strips to test fentanyl and substances, but we are the first organization to actually do a study and to figure out that this strip is actually the best in the market. And so now we're the largest non-wholesaler distributor of the fentanyl test strips. And so that's something that we've done to address the fentanyl crisis now. And so, and then what we're working on, and I guess this might be maybe my final piece about DanceSafe until obviously y'all have questions, but to address the limitations that there really are. So there's a multitude of ways to conduct drug checking, and from presumptive testing all the way to confirmatory testing. And so the reagents and the fentanyl test strips that we use and that we sell to the general public as harm reduction tools and legitimate and valid harm reduction tools, again, there's a lot of limitations there, and those are only presumptive tests. And so with the reagents, you're basically taking a mixture of chemicals. It's mostly sulfuric acid mixed with various chemicals. You're taking a tiny sample and you're dropping a drop of a reagent on it, and you're witnessing a color change. That in of itself can be problematic because we all have different perceptions of colors, right? But what you're able to do really is to identify the most prevalent substance in a sample. You can't test for purity, you can't test for potency, and then even if you have test results that test as expected, like, oh, it's picking up on some sort of MDMA in the sample, there's no way to tell or to say what else is there. And so what we did last year, what we were planning on doing this year, and what we hope to do in 2021 and beyond is to use advanced testing technology, confirmatory testing technology through an FTIR. It's basically infrared spectrometry. We were using and had access to one through a university in California, and we were using that on outreach and music festivals last year. And so we got a lot of data there, but what that does is it actually can find out all of everything that is contained in a sample. You still can't test for purity, and you don't really know how much of which substance it's picking up is in there, but it'll give you a list of everything. So you can even pick up on the adulterants. And so we raised and did a targeted fundraising campaign. We raised over $60,000 from our supporters and from people in the Burning Man community to buy 2 FTR spectrometers. So we currently have those funds set aside. We were intending on purchasing those 2 machines to use this year on outreach. That obviously is not happening this year, but that's a really exciting development for DanceSafe in 20 years. That we've been around using the reagents. We're finally going to be, we're going to be the first US-based harm reduction organization to be using advanced testing technology as harm reduction services in music festivals and nightlife events. So that's exciting. That's a little bit about DanceSafe. It's a really great organization. We've really come a long way. There's been a pretty good big transformation and culture shift within the organization, and we're getting ready to update our brand and launch a new website. But aside from all that, I do want to shift a little bit into what we expect for our DanceSafe volunteers and for our supporters, and that's in addressing the heinous inequalities that our BIPOC, our Black, our Brown, our Indigenous community members are facing right now. And so I just wanted to, I would be remiss to not say anything about this, especially as a white woman in this space. And so, if anything I'm saying, I invite you, and I apologize if there are any BIPOC viewers right now, you can totally tune out. You can leave. This obviously is not addressed to you, and it shouldn't take up any more of your capacity. And so I'm really addressing my white comrades right now. And if any of this is making you uncomfortable, I really encourage you to stay with that discomfort. Imagine it as if you had something difficult arise during a psychedelic experience. That's oftentimes where the most transformation happens, is in those times. And so I encourage you to maybe ground yourself when you start feeling that discomfort. Take a few deep breaths and just explore why you're feeling uncomfortable. It might be a big signal to you. And so I'm going to read a little bit from, and I encourage you to go to our website, dancesafe.org. This will be the first blog that you see on our front page, but it's from our official statement. And so there is no room for white supremacy in the DanceSafe community, and I think that should stand true for the entire psychedelic community as a whole, especially considering the amount of cultural appropriation that has happened within the psychedelic community. With us utilizing sacred substances that were never part of our culture to heal our wounds that were caused by our own culture. That's a whole nother discussion. But as privileged members of the psychedelic community, we must be diligently and actively anti-racist. White supremacy comes in many forms, often exercised covertly. It is often exemplified by white denial of existing racial problems and refusal to hear, acknowledge, and act on the needs of Black and Brown communities. And I should include Indigenous communities as well. So we, as those privileged members of the psychedelic community, must collectively acknowledge, hear, and act on the needs of people in color in our community regarding their requests and to keep their requests at the center of our work. So we have and when I'm saying we, I'm consistently referring to white members of the psychedelic community. We have a responsibility to examine our own privilege and use widely available resources to educate ourselves. I think it is extremely, extremely important for us to know that it is not up to our people, our friends of color, our colleagues of color, our peers of color to do that education for us. They are carrying an enormous amount of emotional burden and identity burden that they have been carrying for centuries now. And so there are a ton of resources out there that you can access with, with a simple Google search to educate yourself. Again, I recommend checking out some of the resources that we have linked into this blog. But in this is this intersectionality with the drug war, which in its core is racist. So we have a responsibility to never let our community forget that the war on drugs is a war on people, but specifically a war on people of color. Racial targeting and institutionalized stigma are two of the biggest contributing factors to the drug criminalization, and drug education cannot take place without acknowledgement of and active retaliation against the systems which seek to marginalize communities of color. Again, being white, being privileged, silence is violence, basically. So we have a duty to act, and especially to protect people in our community that often need access to these healing plant medicines the most. We have a responsibility to remind our communities that the music and the art that bring us all together as a community has been sparked and influenced by Black people. There is an enormous amount of articles out there that show the origins of house music and other EDM categories and how they were, inspired by Black people. And that's something that we should never forget. And then we have a responsibility to create a container in the psychedelic community where BIPOC feels safe to participate in the community and seek services from harm reduction organizations like DanceSafe, and especially those of us that contribute to the overwhelming whiteness of our organization and community. And so, let's see here. So yeah, I wasn't intending again on speaking about all this, but I think it's really important. And I know that thanks y'all. I see all of your support here in the comments. I super appreciate it. Nice to hear from you, Hannah. Hannah's is working on the DanceSafe team as well. She's killing it. So that leaves me 10 minutes. I believe, Merrick, if I'm right, I'm supposed to leave the last 10 minutes for comments, questions.
Yes,
I can keep going, but
your call, yo. But yeah, I mean, thank you for both sides of your talk. I think both are equally important, and especially today, we've been trying to do what we can with this conference to really address these pressing issues and be able to take that forward kind of in a very integration type of sense of what are the daily rituals and habits that we're integrating to be able to create that world that psychedelics teach us so often about, but we fall short on in implementation too often. I'd love to start on the first part of your talk and really just understand a little bit more. You've had so much experience with specifically harm reduction in this space and mechanisms and actual tangible products that contribute to harm reduction. Right now, we're seeing so many, cannabis dispensaries, for instance, beginning to offer mushroom products. From the research that we've done, we've seen that, we're getting around 12 new dispensaries per month popping up that are working underground. We've actually seen about a third of the portfolio of products of some of these dispensaries being changed, within a couple of weeks into psychedelics instead of cannabis. So there's clearly immense demand. There are consumers purchasing this. What are the things that the psychedelics community can be doing to actually introduce harm reduction into the underground market, as well as kind of the above ground, more, I guess, legally approved and policy driven types of changes that are happening today?
Yeah. So if I'm hearing you right, it's kind of like it's an accessibility question. And I think that so to overcome, okay, I think that in order to make drug checking more accessible to both these underground markets and the markets that are above ground, we need to remove some barriers. And so something I didn't mention, and this is what Hannah is working on. So DanceSafe is currently working on a policy program through our Test It program. We're working on putting together an advocacy toolkit and compiling resources so folks can start grassroots efforts to change state paraphernalia laws. And so one of the biggest barriers to access to harm reduction services and tools such as harm reduction or such as drug checking kits is that under most state laws, drug checking kits and fentanyl test strips are considered illegal drug paraphernalia. And so we are working on, and there's been other efforts like through the DPA, and there has been success in these efforts where states and localities, including DC, have either exempt or removed the language that makes drug checking kits illegal to possess and use. And so that's a big barrier for us, especially in trying to legitimize drug checking as a harm reduction and public health tool. We a lot of times want to partner with public health officials and offer our services into the community other than just, outside of the nightlife scope. And we're met with resistance in this area because the public health officials are worried about the implications of possessing something that's illegal under their state's laws. So I think in order to make it more, I know that in order to make it more accessible, we have to start removing these legal barriers to simple possession and use of drug checking kits. And then a greater barrier that's a little bit more amorphous and less tangible than the state drug paraphernalia laws is a really lovely piece of legislation passed by Joe Biden in 2003 that's colloquially known as the RAVE Act. And that basically would hold any vendor, any venue owner or promoter liable if they are caught knowingly letting drug use happen on premise. And so we have a really difficult time finding our way into certain nightlife events and large music festivals, EDC, that won't allow us on site because in theory, allowing DanceSafe to be there, even if we're not drug checking, even if we're just educating about drug use, it could be seen as them knowingly allowing drug use to happen on premise. And so we have a couple layers of legal barriers that I think need to be removed in order for drug checking and harm reduction services in general to truly be accessible to everyone.
Yeah, thank you. Continuing off of that, we have two more questions from the audience. I'll start with Harsh's. Basically asking to shed some more light on accessibility of FTIR spectrometers to promote more organizations around the world to provide harm reduction services.
Sure. Well, I will mention actually, we in the United States are quite behind in the harm reduction world. If you look at Europe as a case study, Europe has far exceeded, and even Canada, they have far exceeded the United States as far as harm reduction goes, specifically nightlife harm reduction. And so we have our colleagues, our comrades in the UK, the Loop. In Canada, you have folks in Canada, they're already using spectrometers. They're already using advanced testing technology. And so in the United States, we're really far behind. And again, the accessibility comes down to, technically, it would be illegal for us to possess these machines in certain states where it's considered, drug paraphernalia. But also funding is a huge barrier for us. So the folks that I referenced in the UK and in Canada, and these harm reduction groups, they're getting support and money from their governments, from their local governments to institute these services, which in those countries are viewed as public health services, as necessary public health services. So for instance, I was in Amsterdam last May, they have drop-in centers. If you are a person who uses drugs and you have a sample, you can go into a center, drop off your sample, have it analyzed by this type of technology, and then you can get your result back. And so for us in the United States, it was a huge barrier. The biggest barrier for us, honestly, was funding. And so we saw our community step up in a really, really amazing way to, for us to raise enough money to purchase these machines. And so that's kind of where we're at now. We still don't have support from the government, but it's not going to stop us from using these machines.
Gotcha. Okay, beautiful. And to move to the second part of your talk and to finish off, Hannah is bringing up a question on how can psychedelic users use their privilege to advocate for policy reform that positively impacts BIPOC users of more stigmatized substances?
Yeah, that's a great question, Hannah. I think that it's really important to, one, be connected with the people that are already doing the work. Which there's a lot of people already out there doing the work. It's important to become involved with those groups and to not try to recreate the wheel. I think being in a position of privilege, where oftentimes our voices are already amplified, and so we can use our already amplified voices to amplify the voices that aren't being amplified, that need to be. And so I think learning organizing skills is a huge importance. I've recently learned that there's actually a difference between being an activist and being an organizer. I, being of the older generation, I'm still like in the activist realm, and I'm learning from all these young people and these young people of color on how to make meaningful organization happen. And so I would encourage, the white folks in the community to, one, find the other white people that are doing the work, figure out how they can support the BIPOC folks in the community that are also doing that work. We're not trying to do the work on top of what the communities of color are already doing. We need to organize as white folk to help amplify the work that the BIPOC community is already doing. We're not out here in this vacuum doing this work ourselves. And so we need to team up with the communities of color that are doing the drug policy reform work on the ground, and we need to listen to them, and we need to figure out how we can support amplifying their voices. And so, I'm not entirely sure what that looks like, other than like educating yourself. Again, this comes back to self-education, anti-racism training, learning how to be a better ally, and then taking those skills into the drug policy reform world and helping to amplify the communities of color that are doing that work.
Mm-hmm. And we have one last question from Alex. It's saying, how can I bring more awareness and info to Central California? I am working with Latinx community and sharing info about plant medicines.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, I mean, you can reach out to me directly. I think I have a lot of resources for you. We have a very active, well, with a grain of salt, we have a very active LA DanceSafe chapter. And our folks in the LA DanceSafe chapter are very involved in the nightlife communities there, but also the drug policy reform communities. And so I encourage you to, maybe go through the DanceSafe training and to get connected with the Los Angeles DanceSafe chapter, who's doing really, really incredible work. And then also, I have contacts all over California if you're interested in drug policy reform work as well. And so it's just getting connected to the right people who, in my experience, have always been welcome to having more people involved, more voices, more bodies in the movement.
Mm-hmm. Maddie, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time and insights. We will be looking forward to talking to you more soon.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you for organizing this. Take care, everyone.
Be well.
Bye.